Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Iris Tao in for Tiffany Meyer. Our top story. The U.S. arresting 7 Chinese nationals. Authorities say they illegally entered Guam while the island was conducting a missile test. And more on the $10 billion plan to bolster Guam's missile defense against threats from China. And President-elect Trump threatening to take back the Panama Canal, a passageway critical to U.S. commerce. Details on China's growing influence on this key waterway. The White House rolling out its latest investigation on Chinese-made semiconductors. Find out what the probe has to offer for the incoming Trump administration. Former U.S. Marine pilot Daniel Duggan will soon be extradited to the U.S. He's accused of training Chinese military pilots against federal law. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Iris Tao in for Tiffany this week. Before we dive into today's top story, we have an announcement. There won't be new episodes on December 24th nor on the 25th. We, the China in Focus team, wish each and every one of you happy holidays. The U.S. has arrested 7 Chinese citizens. Authorities accuse them of illegally entering Guam at the same time the island conducted a key missile interception test. The Guam Customs and Quarantine Agency said at least 4 of them were found in the vicinity of a military installation. Guam is home to many military installations, including Andersen Air Force Base. Authorities said all of the Chinese nationals arrived on the same boat from Saipan, in part of the Northern Mariana Islands just 140 miles away from Guam. Investigations are underway. The U.S. plans to spend $10 billion to bolster Guam's missile defense over the next decade. Guam is known as the tip of the spear of U.S. military might. It's critical for U.S. power projection in the Indo-Pacific. And that's because the island is closer to China than Hawaii. Here's Rick Fisher, Senior Fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center on Guam's strategic importance.
It is the most important outpost for the United States in deterring a Chinese attack against Taiwan, Chinese military action against the Philippines and Japan. Everything that the United States would have to do to deter or combat Chinese aggression will depend on access to functioning military bases in Guam.
Because of its location, Guam is also more vulnerable to attack from China. In 2019, Beijing tested a ballistic missile nicknamed Guam Killer. Now the U.S. is arming Guam to the teeth, preparing for a worst-case scenario, a Chinese missile attack on Guam. The Pentagon successfully intercepted a ballistic missile off the coast of Guam during a defense test 2 weeks ago. The missile test is just a start. The U.S. government plans to bolster Guam's missile defense, pouring in $10 billion over the next decade. And part of the plan includes positioning missile defenses at 16 sites on the island. They would use advanced hardware as well as a new radar. The U.S. has also deployed its latest nuclear-powered fast-attack submarine to Guam. Over the weekend, President-elect Donald Trump threatened to take back the Panama Canal, accusing Panama of ripping off the U.S. and worried about China's growing influence. Here's the story.
Because we're being ripped off at the Panama Canal like we're being ripped off everywhere else.
President-elect Donald Trump said on Sunday that the U.S. could reassert control over the Panama Canal, accusing Panama of charging excessive rates to use the Central American Passage.
If the principles, both moral and legal, of this magnanimous gesture of giving are not followed, then we will demand that the Panama Canal be returned to the United States of America in full, quickly, and without question.
Trump made the comments at America Fest, an annual event organized by Turning Point, an allied conservative group. They came hours after he leveled a similar threat against Panama in a Saturday night post on Truth Social. Panamanian President Jose Raul Mulino reaffirmed the country's sovereignty over the canal in a recorded statement on X, adding that Panama's sovereignty and independence are non-negotiable.
I want to express that every square meter of the Panama Canal and its adjacent areas belong to Panama and will continue to belong to Panama.
The U.S. largely built the canal and administered territory surrounding it for decades. Accords were signed in 1977 that paved the way for the canal's return to full Panamanian control. The U.S. handed over control in 1999. The waterway accounts for 2.5% of global seaborne trade and is critical to U.S. imports of autos and commercial goods by container ships from Asia, and for U.S. exports of commodities, including liquefied natural gas. Trump also warned that he would not let the canal fall into, quote, the wrong hands.
It was solely for Panama to manage and not for China or any other country to manage.
China does not control or administer the canal, but a subsidiary of Hong Kong-based CK Hutchison Holdings has long managed two ports located on the Caribbean and Pacific entrances to the waterway. It is not clear how Trump would seek to regain control over the canal.
How deeply is the Chinese Communist Party involved in the canal and country Panama? Let's take a look.
China is the canal's second largest user behind the U.S., and it's been expanding its influence there by investing in Panama's mining rights, developing infrastructure, and creating Spanish-language CCP media. A Hong Kong-based firm gained control of 2 out of 5 ports surrounding the canal. In 2017, Panama switched its diplomatic relations from Taiwan to the Chinese Communist Party. A year later, it joined China's Belt and Road Initiative, a CCP plan for growing its influence largely by investing in other countries' infrastructure. U.S. military leaders are concerned about Chinese projects along the canal. That's because Chinese firms are subject to CCP control.
More tariffs on Chinese goods could be on the horizon. The Biden administration on Monday announced a new trade probe into China's older types of semiconductors. These technologies are used in things ranging from cell phones to military defense systems. The White House said the investigation will be passed on to the incoming Trump administration for completion. It could be the first step for potential tariffs or other trade restrictions on Chinese chips, if President-elect Trump decides to take it up. And Trump has previously vowed to impose a 60% levy on Chinese imports. He plans to execute the measure through executive orders on the first day in office. The latest investigation will be carried out under Section 301 of the Trade Act. That's a law previously used by the Biden administration to impose tariffs on Chinese imports, including electric vehicles, batteries, and solar panels. The global markets have seen a surge of these Chinese tech products with lower price tags. This came at the cost of American firms, many of which were forced out of business. The U.S. officials fear that semiconductors could be China's next targeted industry as the regime doubled down on its chip manufacturing. In addition to trade, President Biden has been pushing to curb China's access to advanced semiconductors. The administration also rolled out industrial policies that seek to incentivize domestic innovation. Speaking about the measure in a recent interview, U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo said, quote, "The only way to beat China is to stay ahead of them." The Biden administration has announced it's giving hundreds of millions of dollars in military funding to Taiwan. The $571.3 million aid package will be allocated for defense articles and services provided by the Defense Department.
The funding will also go towards military education and training. To date, this marks the largest aid package the U.S. has ever granted Taiwan. Friday's announcement comes a month after President Joe Biden met with the Chinese Communist Party leader in Peru. And after the meeting, the White House said Biden reiterated that the United States opposes any unilateral changes to the status quo. Biden also wants destabilizing aggressive Chinese military activity around Taiwan to end. The Taiwan issue has become a major point of contention between China and the U.S. The U.S. is bound by law to supply Taiwan's government with weapons to defend itself.
On top of that, the Defense Department announced on Friday it had approved $295 million in military sales to Taiwan. President-elect Donald Trump has expressed that he would like Taiwan to pay more for America's protection. Former U.S. Marine pilot Daniel Duggan will be extradited from Australia to the U.S. to face charges. Australia's Attorney General Mark Dreyfus said this on Monday. Duggan is accused of aiding China's military. Duggan was a U.S. citizen and right now is a 55-year-old naturalized Australian citizen. He faces charges that include breaking U.S. arms control law for allegedly training Chinese military pilots to land on aircraft carriers. Duggan's lawyers have said there is no evidence the Chinese pilots he trained were military and that he was no longer a U.S. citizen at the time when he trained Chinese pilots. Duggan started living in China in 2014. Shortly after he returned to Australia in 2022, he was arrested. If found guilty, Duggan could face up to 65 years in prison. And coming up, President-elect Trump favors keeping TikTok accessible in the U.S. market for a while. He said he garnered a huge following among young people through the China-backed app.
Maybe we got to keep this sucker around a little while.
European country Albania will shut down TikTok for a year. This after the killing of a 14-year-old boy. What would a war between China and Taiwan look like? A Taiwanese TV series is laying out their idea. The production's showrunner on the danger of growing numb to a conflict looming over the island. That's next, after the break, here on China in Focus. Letting TikTok stick around in the U.S. for at least a little while. That's a message put out by President-elect Trump at an event in Arizona. Trump joined the China-backed app and gained a massive following during his presidential campaign in June.
We did go on TikTok, and we had a great response with billions of views, billions.
Back in 2020, Trump spearheaded efforts to ban TikTok through executive action, citing national security concern. But after reports of a recent meeting with TikTok CEO Shou Chu, Trump told the press that he had a, quote, warm spot for the social media app. He said the platform helped him win his lead among young people.
They brought me a chart, and it was a record, and it was so beautiful to see. And as I looked at it, I said, maybe we got to keep this sucker around a little while.
Earlier this year, President Biden signed a bill that would force TikTok to divest from its Chinese parent company ByteDance or else face a ban in the U.S. market. The legislation received bipartisan support in both chambers of Congress. Lawmakers and national security experts said TikTok could serve as a Trojan horse for China to harvest American user data. And coming up on January 10th, the Supreme Court is slated to hear the company's challenge to the ban. If the court doesn't rule in TikTok's favor, the app may be out of commission in the U.S. on January 19th. The Supreme Court will hear arguments on January 10th on whether the TikTok ban violates free speech under the First Amendment. NTD's Jack Bradley discussed this with Nathan Lemer, former FCC policy advisor and CEO of Fixed Gear Strategies.
Nathan, thank you for joining us. Does this indicate that the Supreme Court finds merits in TikTok's arguments? And what do you make of the timing here?
I think it's an important step by the Supreme Court to finally say that this is a problem, that TikTok is a problem, and that the Congress and the president have ruled appropriately to move forward to ban TikTok, to make sure that it's divested and out of our internet ecosystem.
And now, how should the U.S. government balance national security concerns with the protection of free speech in the context of platforms like TikTok?
Well, I think it's pretty clear in the law and the way the district court ruled 2 weeks ago that TikTok, the ban against TikTok is about the conduct of TikTok and not actually about the content. So it's not a First Amendment issue. It's actually a national security concern. And TikTok has at every step of the way shown that it is not a wholly independent entity, but a part of the CCP. And I think the Supreme Court will put the final nail in the coffin to say that, no, this law is legal and TikTok must divest by January 19th. And if they don't, they will be kicked off the platforms.
Well, the TikTok app that we have in the U.S. does not really match the version that they have in China. As we know it, it's very different. Why would China's ByteDance fight all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court to keep an app in the U.S. that's essentially banned from its own citizens?
You know, it's a great question. One I would actually ask some Chinese Communist Party officials. But the reality is that TikTok is quite popular. It's an incredibly appealing app to many people, able to be short form videos that can spread. And and share your story, your narrative. But the reality is that behind the scenes, what's going on the app is it's a spy device allowing the totalitarian state to spy on Americans and users across the world who use it. And so what the Congress has passed and what the Supreme Court will evaluate is whether this was legally an appropriate measure to ban TikTok, much like the United States government banned Huawei and ZTE a couple years ago. It's the same concept, which is that this communications network, this communications platform is in fact a spy device used for surveillance against Americans and should not be on any of our platforms like Apple or Google.
Now, if the court rules against ByteDance, do you think that it'll reconsider to sell TikTok to an American buyer before the January 19th deadline here?
I think it'll have to. The reality is that if they don't sell, then you're going to have a lot of upset investors, but also you're going to have a lot of users who are going to be kicked off the platform. And the reality is that they have a path forward. There are American buyers who would like to buy this, but the only way that they can buy this is if China divests entirely and is separated in a wholly owned independent entity that is operated by Western powers who are not going to hand over our information to the Chinese government or any other foreign adversary for them.
Right. So the very next day after this decision, January 20th, Trump takes office, and he met with the CEO of TikTok on Monday. He said that he would take a look at TikTok and that he has a soft spot for the app. What, if anything, could Trump be considering as an alternative to the ban, and particularly with his hawkish stance on China?
No, I think that's exactly right. I think TikTok actually is another arrow in his quiver to hold China accountable. We see that we're talking about rebalancing our trade. We're talking about ways that the United States can hold China accountable in the Pacific. I think this plays a role in Trump's effort to hold China accountable and to allow us to reign supreme, I think, in the West and make sure that our technologies are flourishing. And so I look forward to seeing what he does. I think that he has some incredible advisors around him, whether it's Marco Rubio, Jacob Hellberg, individuals who have been really staunchly opposed to TikTok. And I think this is an opportunity for them to think critically about how we can move forward in the next steps. He's the deal maker, the consummate deal maker, and this is an opportunity to make a deal that can actually put Americans forward and also allow next generation innovation to flourish.
Right. Now, if the TikTok ban stands, what would be the legal precedent set for future federal regulation of social media platforms in the U.S.?
I think it's a separate issue. I think the reality is that China has a connection here, and it's a national security concern, and that's different than what you might see with other companies like Facebook or Google or Instagram, et cetera. Like, the reality is that this app is not owned by an independent actor. It is owned and operated by ByteDance on behalf of the Chinese government, and that's the difference. The reality is this is not about content. This is about the conduct of the company. And none of these other companies we're talking about does business in China. They have no relationships. You can't access Meta on the App Store in China. The reality is it's only here in the U.S.
Nathan Lemur, thank you very much for sharing your insights here today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
The European country Albania said the government will shut down the Chinese-owned app TikTok for 1 year, blaming the video app for inciting violence and bullying.
Albanian authorities held 1,300 meetings with teachers and parents following the stabbing death of a teenager in mid-November by another teen after a quarrel that started on TikTok. Prime Minister Edi Rama said the shutdown would begin sometime next year. Albanian parents have been worried after reports of children taking knives and other objects to school to use in fights or against bullies. The children got the idea from stories they saw on TikTok. Authorities have set up protective measures at schools to prevent further violence. Rama said Albania would follow how TikTok and other countries react to the one-year shutdown before deciding whether to allow the company to resume operations in Albania.
In China's invasion of Taiwan, a topic too sensitive to discuss on the island, but now a Taiwanese TV drama is focusing on just that. What are the stories behind it? Let's take a look.
An upcoming Taiwanese TV drama, 0 Day, promises to show Taiwanese audiences what a war with China might look like. It's an unprecedented production, confronting a topic that remains too sensitive for many Taiwanese filmmakers and with creators facing indirect censorship from China. The 10-episode series is set to be released next year, but an extended trailer released in July has already set off buzz in Taiwan, where residents have for many years considered a war with China unlikely. In recent years, though, China has stepped up war games, simulated attacks, and blockades of the island. Beijing maintains democratically governed Taiwan is Chinese territory, while the government in Taipei rejects that claim. The trailer for Zero Day focuses on several imagined scenarios should a war between China and Taiwan break out. It teased a global financial collapse, the activation of Chinese sleeper agents, and panicked residents trying to flee the island.
没有自由.
Without freedom, Taiwan is not Taiwan, says a fictional Taiwan president in a speech, urging unity after declaring war on China. The live feed gets cut off, replaced by a Chinese state television anchor who tells Taiwanese to surrender and to report hidden pro-independence activists to landing Chinese soldiers. Speaking to Reuters, showrunner Zheng Xinmei said Taiwanese should confront the fear of invasion, rather than pretend it will never happen.
When we plan this drama, we hope to make people think, would they trade away their freedoms for power or for an enormous sum of money? When faced with the temptation, what will the Taiwanese people choose?
But for the series crew, confronting the idea in fiction has meant real challenges, from funding and casting to finding places to film. Zheng said more than half of the crew of Zero Day asked to be anonymous on the crew list. Some, including a director, pulled out of production at the last minute over worries it might jeopardize their future work in China or the safety of family members working there.
Those of us who worked on this production hope that this drama, which tackles such a taboo topic, becomes popular. That would open a door for other creators to not be too concerned about the China issue.
For many Taiwanese artists and entertainers, China is a much larger and lucrative market for film and television. But Beijing has regularly called out Taiwan artists who are seen as violating China's political ideology or have threatened to blacklist those unwilling to cooperate.
That's all we have for you today on China in Focus. I'm Iris Tao. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you soon.